That tells us that we have in New Zealand not too many people that have the skills that we need to sit on a board. And when unskilled people sit on a board, they usually make poor governance decisions because they think about the operation too much. They don't think about the leadership part. And I give you a quick example. I was sitting in as an advisor on a board meeting not too long ago of a very large hospital well down south in New Zealand. And as I flipped through the board meeting minutes right before the board meeting started, I saw that the chief operating officer had talked in this board report to the board about the new hospital rooms. They were building some new hospital rooms. And in the board meeting minutes, he had included the color samples for the walls, which I thought was insane. Because when you give a board color samples of what the wall will be painted like inside a new hospital room, what will everybody on the board start doing? What would you do if I gave you some color samples?
Choosing what would be the most appropriate.
Yeah, you would decide what, in your opinion, is the best. Is it the job of a board to decide what color the rooms are painted? No. The board is responsible to get the funding to expand the hospital because there's a need to do so as part of the long-range plan. Then you turn this over to the operator, the CEO, and you say, you get your people going so that in 6 months we have the additional wing up and operational. And nobody cares. The board shouldn't care about the colors. So everybody immediately went, oh, that's a little yellow. And then they ran out. Some of them went out to see it in natural light. And I went like, it's a patient room. It's inside. There is no sunlight. No. We have to see whether it's too ochre or too taupe. I heard more new color names than I've ever heard before. People apparently got into this. So when you have people that have executive operational skills, then they quite often apply those in a board meeting because they're comfortable with that. While in reality, as you know, the power of a board ends at the CEO, and the power of the operation starts at the CEO going downwards. Board members do not operate in a firm. Independent directors want to serve more than as legal, audit, compliance, rule-making people. They want to have a purpose. So when a person tells you, I want to join your board because I want to do good, what do you think that means, sir?
They might want to perform something.
Okay, they want to perform something. What could you perform as a board director that you would think is a good thing?
Set the rules. And
Okay, good. You could change some rules to make the operation work better, to make the company more agile, more flexible, to possibly have new rules going that allow you to do something different. And can you imagine how many people right now are sitting in Palmerston North, our mothership, we're here, and are thinking about what rules we need to change to make sure that we get through some students that are not here, some students that are in transit, some students that don't like to be in a classroom, ultimately no classroom. Imagine how many rules that takes to change so that everybody still gets a degree. We are literally talking to someone in Beijing at the Ministry of Education in China to make sure that China agrees that we can deliver online material. As you know, in China, there is a general rule that online material is not appropriate in a university. They just don't allow that. So we now have, since last night, an agreement that for as long as it takes, we can deliver either synchronous while we teach at the right time and do it by video, or offline video content. So all of those that are worried about what China thinks we're good. But it takes several people to be available to a phone call, to talk with somebody in Beijing, to have a rule change. And this is just one of the tips of the many icebergs around here. So we can change rules, and the board, of course, is the highest group that changes rules. If somebody wants to join a board and says, I want to do some good, what could they mean?
They could probably compromise the objective of the company.
No, I need something more practical. This is a management course. Tell me what would you think if you joined a group of leaders and you wanted to do good? How could you say at the end of a month or two or 3 or 4 years that you've done good? What could you measure?
The profitability.
Okay, good. If profitability is a driver, and for most companies it should be, because you need money to do good, then you would measure that under your stewardship, under your guidance over the last year or month or whatever, cash has improved, income has improved, the company is in a better cash flow position than before. It is good that we get to decide what good means for us. But you can see that ultimately, if everybody in a boardroom, the 7 people, the 9 people, the 5 people, have a different definition of what is good, that we ultimately have chaos. And governance doesn't work well with chaos. It is a very rule-based approach. We have higher people, not so high people, middle people, lower people, and everybody has to understand what the rule is, otherwise you're falling to bits. So you can see that the general world approach to governance that we heard from Friedman is quite different than what thousands of company directors and managers tell you in New Zealand. They are much more individualistic. They expect that it is their opinion that matters, rather than what the company has set as a goal and they fulfill that duty. You can see that that is a problem. And if you're ever asked to explain to people what is a good system of governance, it is usually the system where everybody knows what we want to achieve, where we have clear accountabilities, where people have given a job to do to help achieve this, and where we then report back and measure whether what you wanted to do has actually been done. That's a good system. Of course, if you have in your governance approach also a few minutes that you spend each month on talking about risks. For instance, if you're in the tourism operator business right now, the risk is that cruise ships no longer come to New Zealand for the next 5 months, well, till the end of June, so not that long, but it's quite a long period of time. It's the end of our summer seasons, probably not a big thing, but probably risk discussions. What if a cruise ship doesn't come? What do we do to have continued revenues? What do we do with excess staff? And just think for a moment that we have a 52% government-owned airline in New Zealand. That means the government is a majority owner of Air New Zealand. And Air New Zealand, which has a total of about 11,000 staff, give and take, now needs to only have 6,000 staff, or fewer. When a government owns a big company, what is one of the main interests of a government? What does a government want to see from a big company?
They want to control. Or
Yes, they have control. They control more than 50% of the shares. That means they control the board, right? You cannot have a board member appointed unless you have majority control. And the government could therefore put people on the board that do exactly what government is, or policy is. What would one of the government policies be for a large employer? I'm just about giving it to you.
they want to, if the government owns the larger company, they will think about the profits. If they think they
Okay, when the government owns a very large employer in New Zealand, what do they want that employer to continue doing?
tax the government.
Employee. So a government would be very unhappy if there was massive unemployment. And think for a moment, we only have one airline in this country, one big airline. Where do people go who've worked at airlines? There is no piloting job if you're a pilot being laid off, because the only airline that we have in the country is laying you off. So the government would have a different interest than the board possibly would have with the CEO, because they have to make sure they don't run out of money. If you pay people, thousands of people, who do not do work because you have no income, then you have to continue paying them. That reduces your cash. You then go bankrupt. And when you go bankrupt, the government has to bail you out. It's a bad thing for travel agents and passengers because they don't trust that you're still in operation. And so we have a huge brand issue. You do not want to go bankrupt. And it's hard to go bankrupt when you're majority government owned. But the issue here is that we have very clear decisions that, for instance, a board is being given by the shareholder, and a majority shareholder is an important shareholder, and if it's the government, it's a very important shareholder. So what we have is we have in New Zealand probably a distinction compared to many other countries, and that distinction is that people here believe that when they go on a board, they are there for their own purpose, not to be part of a group. And I give you a very quick riddle. It's very basic, so stick with me, but see that you understand that. Let's assume we have 7 members of a board, right? 2 hands, 7 members. And we have 7 members because we want an odd number so that we can have a decision and not an equal number voting for each side. And let's assume you are discussing at the board level something that is incredibly important. Whether we sell a part of the business to a company in Vietnam. That would have a huge impact. Part of our business would go away, we get money for it, but we are now much smaller. We have a lot of people unemployed because Kiwis wouldn't easily go to Vietnam and continue there. So there is the blood boiling, there is screaming, there is mouth foaming activity. This is a big issue. And let's assume that you're voting, you will vote with a group of 3. That means you lose. And the way we know that is that a good chairperson in a board meeting will from time to time do a kind of a gauging. Okay, if we were to vote now, what would you say? So that they get an idea where this is going and also an idea of when to stop talking and start voting. When it comes time to vote, I want all of you imagining that you are on the losing side of this argument. You have said your piece. You have stood up on your chair, you have taken your shoe and whacked it on the table, and you remember which political leader did that first? A president of Russia starting with K, Mr. Khrushchev. So in a discussion with an American president, he wanted to make an argument, he didn't feel he was heard enough, so he took his shoe off and he whacked the shoe on the table, and that got him attention. So the idea is you are now, in your minds, board directors, you are voting with the 3, you will be overridden, the others will win. So when it comes to voting, will you switch your vote to be a majority, 7-0, or will you stick to your opinion and come out with a 4-3 result? And I would think that most of you in your minds will say, I'm going to stick to my vote. It's my opinion. I want to record that. I'm against this. So if you were to think that, then you're thinking about your role in a board. But in a board, you are not there for your opinion. You are there to send a message throughout the whole organization and to its stakeholders of what the board has decided. And think for a moment, if you have a hugely unpopular, contentious, very hard discussed topic, what signal does it send when you come with a 4-3 vote out of the boardroom compared to a 7-0 vote out of the boardroom? Which vote helps the CEO more to get this job done? Which vote is a stronger signal? Which vote tells everybody what exactly we will do? 7-0 or 4-3? 7-0. You will make the life of the CEO so much easier in getting this job done, because if it's 4-3, everybody says, oh, maybe one of them dies. And then we can revote. Maybe we push somebody down the stairs. And then they can't vote the next time, and then we get our vote through. So people will immediately say, it's only one vote different. They aren't really committed. This is something that could have gone either way. Let's continue fighting. Rather than 7-0, this is what we instruct you to do. Do it. And you can see that those of you who would have initially thought this is all about you and your opinion will now have to rethink that, because as a board member, you are there to instruct others. And it is much easier to instruct when you are authoritative, when you are clear, when you are strong. So we have two different ways of setting this up. When we look at how board authority is exercised, then we usually make rules. That was a good suggestion before from the colleague over there. We set goals, we decide on what we need to perform, we give people a budget, we hopefully give them matching authority, the tools to get the job done, but then we expect that that person, that department, that whole company performs. So the authority that you have as a board is an authority that you have to share. You have to downstream give people smaller authority so that they can get on and get the job done. Anything different that you do in a company costs money, because it costs time, it costs effort. There may be a couple of petrol tanks to go somewhere and see what other companies do. There may be somebody who's going to take a trip somewhere and learn something. There are additional secretaries needed to do whatever secretaries are needed for. There are people who will trial something. That costs time. Then there may be an error. They fix it. Every time you do something different, it costs money. So we need to fund. We need to have a budget. We need to have resources for any board decisions we make. The expectation that people with the same skill as before, with the same budget as before, working in the same manner as before, will suddenly create a 15% increase in performance because you tell them, is not going to work.